Hi, anyone at home. We're carrying on with our Hobbit reading. We've got a few children listening along live, but we thought we would record it for anyone who would miss out on the reading along with us. So we're on chapter 2, Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved after to think that they had all gone without him and without bothering to wake him up. But with never a thank you, he thought. And yet, in a way, he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself. "Thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age." So he put his apron on, lit the fires, boiled the water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out to the dining room. By the time the sun was shining and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze, Bilbo began to whistle loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," said he, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you the message, because they could not wait." "What message?" said Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephants!" said Gandalf. "You are not at all yourself this morning. You have never dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? I've had enough to do with washing up at 4:14. "If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note. Written, of course, in his own notepaper. This is what he read. "Thorin and company to burglar Bilbo greeting. For your hospitality and our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms: cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of the total profits, if any, all travelling expenses guaranteed in any event, funeral expenses to be defrayed by us, our representatives, if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations, and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting that you will be punctual. We have the honour to remain, yours deeply, Thorin and Company." "That leaves you just 10 minutes. You'll have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo. "No time for it," said the wizard. "But," said Bilbo again. "No time for that either. Off you go." To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything he usually took when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was, and when he got to the Bywater just on the stroke of 11, he found he came without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo!" said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. When just then all the others came around the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a small pony, apparently for Bilbo. "Up you two get, off, and off we go," said Thorin. "I'm awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I've come without my hat, and I've left my pocket handkerchief behind, and I haven't got any money. I didn't get your note until 10:45 to be precise. Don't be precise, said Dwalin, and don't you worry. You'll have to manage without your pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to journey's end. As for a hat, I've got a spare hood and cloak in my luggage. That's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn, and just on a fine morning in May it is, on these lovely laden ponies. Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood. It was a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. What his father Bungo would have thought of him, I daren't think. His only comfort was he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long when up came Gandalf, very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe and his tobacco, so that after the party went along very merrily, and they told the stories of and they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except, of course, when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but still he began to feel that adventures were not that bad after all. At first they had passed through Hobbit lands, a wide respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling on by his business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone on to the far into the lone lands where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees, and on some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they'd been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that they had taken and for that the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been good as May can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands they were obliged to camp where they could, but at least had been dry. To think it'll still be June soon, grumbled Bilbo as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time, it was pouring with rain and had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes, his cloak was full of water. The pony was tired and stumbled on stones. The others were too grumpy to talk. And I'm sure the rain has got into their dry clothes and into the food bags, thought Bilbo. Bother burgling and everything to do with it. I wish I was just at home in my nice hole by the fire with just a kettle on, beginning to sing. It was not the last time he had wished that. Still, the dwarves jogged on, never turning round to take any notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the grey clouds the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark as they went down into the deep valley with a river at the bottom. The wind got up, and the willows alongside its banks bent and sighed. Fortunately, the road over the ancient stone bridge, for the river was swollen with the rains, came rushing down from the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed the river. The wind broke up the grey clouds, and the wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. They stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper. And where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on? Not until they did notice that Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merrily keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he was simply not there at all. Just when a wizard would have been most useful too, groaned Dori and Nori, who shared the hobbit's views about regular meals, plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees and thought it was drier under them. The wind shook the rain off the leaves, and the drip, drip, drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have got into the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere, out of almost anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night, not even Oin and Gloin, who were especially good at it.